Anybody out there yet? Hope so. Time's there. Okay. Oh, good. Hi, Mike. Hi, Toby. Thank you for popping in. I'm glad to see there's some video out there. It's always great. Hi, guys. Thanks for dropping by. Hi, Lionel. Thank you. Jonathan, nice to see you guys. It's always nice when you put these things on and people turn up, which is great. Otherwise, just say you're talking to yourself. So, hi, Johnny. Thanks for popping by, mate. Yeah, see you next week. We'll just wait a minute or two because it normally takes for a little while for people to pop up. So, well, that's 5 more than is normal anyway, so that's great. In actual fact, we've got about 100 people that have registered their interest. How many people turn up? An awful lot of people will watch the recording, so that's going to be good. All right, we'll just get sorted. Give people a minute, and then we'll get cracking because I've got a lot to get through. It's like, how do I squeeze all these cock-ups and mess-ups and stuff into an hour? So we'll get cracking fairly soon. I'll repeat this later on, but if anybody's got any questions, you can get, just send me where is it? Okay, that's my email address. Please, if you want a copy of this PowerPoint thing I'm doing, just send me an email with subject line workshop and I'll send it back to you. I promise not to annoy you with other emails and stuff, but if you want to do that, and if you've got any questions, because we'll be rattling through a bit and I'm sure you will, please feel free to email me and I'll do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. Okay, Stefan, what's in that guitar case? Stefan, well, in that guitar case, there's a Loudon guitar made in Northern Ireland. It's my, when other people have a midlife crisis and buy a motorbike, I bought a very expensive guitar. So, yeah, it's gorgeous. It's a thing that keeps me sane. I want you to see, if I move my head the other way, it's my mandolin too, which is my main instrument. So I'll be playing that later, I think. Right, let's get cracking because I've got an awful lot to get through. So I'm going to be moving my, I'll get rid of me, make me small, get rid of my banner. Okay, so we've got a lot of real estate and we'll get cracking if that's all right. Right, so this hour is about 360 cameras and we're going to be looking at different types, slightly different workflows, how we use it. My background, for those of you who don't know me, is I've been working in photogrammetry and imaging for, gosh, 40 plus years now. Won't say how many plus. I've been stitching imagery for years and years. I've been working with 360 cameras for probably 12 years or so. Using this for precision photogrammetry, writing photogrammetry software, developing cameras. So photogrammetry is a bit of my life, but we're going to be talking about 360 imagery as well, which weirdly involves an awful lot of the same processes in terms of stitching and in terms of image quality. And there's a lot of interest around 360 cameras now because they're a very simple way to document sites, but also you can do other things with them. In fact, the number of applications is pretty huge. Let me just get right into my thing here. Let's go. Just running through some of the applications we can get. I'll get rid of me because I'm hiding all that stuff. We'll go to full screen. I'll pop you back. This is just a few of the applications that I've used 360 imagery for in the last probably 5 years. So site documentation for architecture, engineering, and construction, whether that's as built, using it for BIM updates and condition surveys. Using it as part of OHM manuals for handover documentation when you give somebody the keys of the building. Using it for commercial verification. This is what we did. Give us the invoice. The big market that I spend a lot of time working in is crime and crash scene documentation and forensics. Using it for documenting crime scenes, funnily enough, and also for insurance and investigations to do with crashes. Probably the biggest market at the moment, I think, and the biggest potential is for inspection, structural inspection and dilapidation surveys. You can use it for asset management. Lots of people don't know what they've got, or have got old stuff that they need to manage, or they might be building it into a digital twin. But basically every manufacturer, every logistics, every form of commercial enterprise you can think of, from retail to betting shops, don't know what they've got. So photographing it and using 360 imagery is a really easy way of doing it. Think of Google Street View, but indoors. Okay. And if you can do that and navigate Google Street View, it's a great way of communicating. Using it for marketing, where for promotion of property, viewings, things like that. And then get down to more practical stuff like risk management, being able to view a site, see what the conditions are like. And then that leads into health and safety, whether that's inductions or familiarization or a whole slew of applications, which then leans itself into learning and development. Using 360 imagery, whether that's video or static, to show people what to do or where to go or a whole slew of things. One of my favorite things is actually to use it for knowledge management mapping. There's a whole seminar, a workshop I'm going to be doing about that in a month or two's time. Of course, there's the real estate and marketing and dilapidation stuff. So the Matterport type approach, or 360 imagery, where you want to sell a property, commercial or residential. Okay, it's a great way of showing and communicating things so people can be there without being there. It's used in facilities management to show people what they need to fix or what they've got. Insurance, pre and post incident, for documentation, showing what the damage is, or recording things before it's damaged, is a really great application. I need to put my mouse on here so it will work. Activate the window. And then we come into the sort of the more reality capture type applications. I've been building 3D things for 26 years now. And 360 imagery is a really, really useful tool, which is using lots and lots of different applications. Everything from point cloud colorization, for those of you who know. Just keep an eye on the comments. Yeah. For those of you who are using LiDAR scanners, then you will know all about point cloud colorization and some of the problems and issues that you'll get. Looking at VR content, 360 imagery is a fabulous way of generating VR content. And with the launch last week, when it was of Apple's ProVision effect, you're going to see a lot more people asking for this, I am sure. It's also used creating environments in most computer games and in CGI and HDRI, asset creation for the whole games and film industry. And big application for HDRI is if I'm an actor or you're the actor and I'm the monster, in order for me to look real, I've got to be lit in exactly the same way as you, the actor, have. So we use HDRI for photographing the actor, and then we give the file that's created from the dome, the 360 imagery, as a 32-bit file, where every single pixel is a light source. So we give that to the lighting engineer in CGI, and then they recreate it. It's a crucial part of every film you see. We can also use it in architectural visualization to create signs, sky domes and facades and all sorts of things. And a really interesting one that I love because it's a bit funky and a bit cool, is reflection studies. If you're building a building, your glass over it, what's it going to look like in different lights when it rains? There's a famous building in London from a famous browser company who built a beautiful building, but all you can see are the billboards on the other side of the road in reverse. As far as surveying goes, it's a really useful tool that you can use for monitoring multi-points between the control points that you're measuring, and use cloud or cloud compare, for example, to see movement. Utility surveying is a great tool for sticking down holes where you don't want to go and getting great imagery. You might need an extra light source or something, but it's a great way of recording things you may not be able to see. And that leads itself onto photogrammetry, because a lot of people would like to know, can you use 360 imagery for photogrammetry? Well, yes, you can, although I would say it works best if you're working indoors or you're using it in conjunction with some other form of data capture. By itself outdoors, because everything's moving, stitching imagery together, which is essentially what we're going to be doing, is tricky when the wind blows. Indoors, it's great, but you can infill it with other things. But as you'll see, and photogrammetry with 360 is entirely possible without any special equipment, just a simple camera. Right, one sec. Right, go next slide. Right, so, but I think probably one of the biggest applications that I'm coming across is where people want to use it for inspection inside and under. And inspection can include a whole sort of things. So in this case, a railway bridge. Normally this has all been shadow, but because we've used a special technique called HDR, we're able to illuminate the shadows, cope with different light sources. And I'm not sure particularly why I did this photograph. I was just bored the other day and I was just about to play a gig, and that's my guitar. And there was a lovely pint of Guinness on the bar behind me. This was in Athlone. Anyway, another story. So one of my favorite pictures is okay, so how come we've got all this gear, and what do we need to get all these fish in to be able to do all these applications? What do we really need to think about? And the good news is it's really straightforward and simple. This is not hard work. I make my living now, though, by training people to how to do this. So obviously at the end of this, there's going to be a little link if you want to buy a workshop or get onto the one workshops. But today it's all about trying to give you as much free information. And this actually is my son, Charlie, and it took me about half an hour to train him how to do 360 imagery. And this is part of a big project we're doing in Leeds for mapping access for people with disabilities. There's around about 500 images we're doing for this. But it's not hard to do, and we can train up anybody to do it with a following wind and a bit of patience from you guys. However, the problem with 360 imagery is dynamic range. If I'm taking a photograph straight ahead, then the metering system inside my camera will automatically tell me what f-stop, shutter speed, ISO I need. The problem we have with 360 is we're taking in images from all around the clock. So although we might have the sun behind us, when we do 360, the sun's there. And then we start getting into issues with what we call dynamic range, the difference between the dark and the light. So, and what do I mean by that? Well, if I've got a really dark spot or the bright sunny day, in order for us to accommodate that, we would have to, in a camera, accommodate around about what we call 32 f-stops or EVs. They're not quite the same thing, but they're good enough for this explanation. Each one f-stop is doubling the amount of light. Now, the human eye, bless it, can see around about 22 f-stops. But a camera sensor, the best camera sensor currently available off the shelf, will allow you to do 15 f-stops on a single sensor. There are ways of getting around that. So we're only actually seeing a sample. So if we've got the sun in the 360, we're not going to be able to capture. And going back to this one, the red areas are areas where we've got overexposure and no data. And when we say no data, if we were to print this out, those pixels would come out with no ink on them. Now, this is particularly important for us because when we come to stitching or photogrammetry or lots of other things, there's no data there that we can use for tie-in points. So we have to try and minimize that. And this is a reasonable example, but it's not untypical. And this is one of the problems that we always have to think about when we're doing accommodating this. Now, one of the ways we can do this is we can extend the coverage of the sensor by taking bracketed images either side of what we might call our hero image, by overexposing a certain amount and underexposing a certain amount. And by doing that, we can bracket those, that's what it's called. And then we can use a special process called HDR, where we combine these into one image, which does the best using a process called what's it called? Exposure fusion or tone mapping. We can recover highlights and recover details from the shadows and produce one image, which is the best of all worlds. And this is particularly important when we come to stitch, because we can accommodate a big dynamic range when we come to stitch. Now, it's not as hard as it sounds. I mean, it sounds really complicated, but this is the problem. And when we come to actually deploy this, there's a number of things we've got to think about. I mean, this is a photograph I just took this morning in Glasgow, bright sunny sky blue. And although it doesn't look too much around here, we've got all sorts of shadows, which will cause artifacts. And of course, if we come to stitch other images later on, these shadows are constantly moving as the sun changes. Okay. But one of the things we can do is actually use this part of a 360 image inside. And I've shown this because sometimes black and white is a good way of showing things. Anyway, I'm just sort of showing off a little bit, but anyway. So how do we fix this issue? How do we cope with the variation in light? And it's not just about outside, it's also when I'm inside a building. 360 imagery works really well in buildings with constant light. But if I walk past a window with sun streaming in it, I'm going to get exactly the same issue. So sometimes you find with some 360 packages that the stitching doesn't work, or it produces something you can't see. So how do we get around that? Well, there's a number of ways. First off, picking the right camera for the circumstances is a great start. As you'll see, there's lots of different types of cameras. Shooting in RAW whenever we possibly can, that's going to give us a couple of f-stops either side for more adjustment. It's not absolutely necessary, but it does help a lot if you can. We can do this technique called bracketing for HDR capture, where we can take one hero image and then take a number, 2, 3, 4, 5, as many images as we want either side. In actual fact, you don't need to take that many, but that's something we'll show you in later. And you can use RAW or JPEG images for that, and then use a process called tone mapping or exposure fusion, or a technique called masking. Because one of the things is maybe most of the image is perfectly fine, but you just want to change the exposure, the brightness, contrast in shadowed areas or highlighted areas. So that's one thing. But you don't want to do this on every single image because it'll drive you nuts. So you need to have bulk process editing tools. In other words, something that will allow me to do lots of images very quickly. I'm also going to need a pretty good stitching software, because inevitably there's going to be something that goes wrong. Light changes, you get reflections from a window, you're trying to stitch things which are in glazing or cars passing. Sometimes you do need stitching software to help you out, although not many of the things we do are uploaded and are stitched for us. But I prefer to have my own stitching software. The other thing is, it sounds really strange, but a lot of people shoot in landscape mode, shoot in portrait mode, gives you much more overlap. And finally, the thing I think, and what my business is training people on how to use a camera and what to do with the images so you can optimize them so it looks and your things look fabulous. And I'll give you an example of the sort of thing a good 360 image will do. So this is some friends of mine, SurveyWorks, and we were doing a 360 tour of this bridge for inspection. And so all this was dark. It was not a pretty sunny day, but we've managed to illuminate it. And this is sort of not top quality 360, but pretty good. Okay, so we can get this, and this allows us for, especially for inspection, I've got 100% inspection coverage. Now, the good thing about using HDR is I could do this at night and it would look just as good. Anyway, we'll come back to that later on, because that's all part and parcel of what we're talking about. Just looking at my time and trying to make sure, because I've got lots to get through. Right, so you could say lots of people have different ways of doing it, but I divide the camera types up when training into these. The first is what we call omnidirectional. So that's something like here, omnidirectional camera. If I oh, you can't see it. I'm switched off. Omnidirectional cameras. You've seen these, I'm sure. Basically, they're two fisheye lenses stuck back to back, and they are very cheap and they're very good for an awful lot of things. So you've heard of people like Ricoh, and then if they were the first people to come up with this idea. Insta360, GoPro, when Chinese companies got involved, and there's a whole slew of them. We're going to come back onto. I've got a list of them in a minute. Then we have what we call the single lens, and the single lens is where you have a single lens camera, but you rotate the camera around either manually on a bracket or using a robotic or a motorized bracket. And that would apply to drones as well. Now, any digital camera, whether that's a mirrorless point and shoot, is capable of doing 360s, but some are better than others. If I've got an interchangeable lens, much better. If I can put a wide angle or a fisheye lens on it, much better. Or sometimes I want a telephoto lens on it to get lots and lots of images joined together. But a single lens with a rotating bracket, excuse me, is probably the most flexible tool. Then you've got dedicated 360 camera types, what I call HDR robotic. So you've got cameras like Spheron, Civetta, and Klaus, actually all German. Spheron is a purpose-built line scan camera. It's been going for about 15 years. It's sort of got a lot of this business going. Civetta and Lizard Q, another one. They are really they're motorized, but essentially they're a Canon camera, I believe, in a motorized box with its remote control and things. Klaus is they do both motorized robotic brackets for cameras, but also complete systems. I'll show you an example of that photograph. Then, of course, you've got the panoramas that you get from a laser scanner. Great. And then you've got the new generation of mobile mapping as well, which is a multiple lens system sat inside a weatherproof enclosure. So example of that would be Mosaic. You may well have seen an interview I did with the CEO of Mosaic on my YouTube channel. If not, check it out. Really interesting guy. And as they have a camera which sits much like a mobile mapping system, and often incorporated to a mobile mapping system alongside a mobile scanner, a LiDAR scanner, or it's a standalone tool. And I think at this GeoBiz or whatever it's Geo Week in Denver, they're launching the new backpack version. Something to check out. Then, of course, you've got smartphones, and smartphones are becoming ubiquitous, and you can do really, really good work with smartphones. You don't have to spend a lot of money. The beautiful thing about that is there's just a plethora of applications. And of course, you can get your drone mounted, which actually a drone will be a single lens, but you're just using the drone to rotate. Okay. Right. I'm going to run through this. If anybody wants a copy of this PowerPoint. Oh, you're not seeing the screen. Let me have a look. Yeah, only the presentation slides are visible. Okay. Okay. Can maybe just confirm, can I see this box that says omnidirectional 360 camera screen? Yeah, I think you can. Okay, Tom, not sure what your issue is. I think I can see my screen here, so let me see if I can just check that. Go back to that. Yeah, I think we should be okay. All right. There's a list of omnidirectional cameras here. And, you know, there's just loads and loads of them out there. All of them are going to do pretty well the same thing because, weirdly, there's probably only 2 or 3 camera sensor manufacturers out there, and most of them seem to use the same ones. Ricoh started the whole thing. and they are able to do the interesting thing about the Ricoh makes slightly different from the Instas, as they can do in-camera HDR. That's good. It's not so good because you have to wait until you move for it to process HDR. Insta360s, great pieces of kit, and you can spend anything from a couple of £100 to the Insta360 Titan, which has got 8 lenses, and that would be a pro grade thing. That is a bit of a monster. Yeah, I think they're around about 5-6K, something like that. So it really depends on what you're doing. GoPros, great. So I would say the Insta360s, GoPros and Ricohs, they're really what I could call prosumer. They're great if I want to stick it on my surfboard or stick it on my head when I'm skiing. But if you're using it day in, day out, there are a number of things you want. You want to have the ability to have an SD card that take out, and battery life that's going to last you all day. So like the Pro 360 Pro on the Titan will do that. Other ones are going to be for infill, and you wouldn't mind giving one of these to your site agent or site engineer to document things, because they're not going to be using it every day for 24 hours a day, 8 hours shift. Okay. Go through these at your leisure. I've got, please feel free to email me for this presentation and you can check them all up. But interesting ones, the Panono 36, that's a beast, isn't it? That does what we call, that captures in RAW. Most of these actually don't capture in RAW, they capture in JPEG, which is sort of one of the limitations of them. And the reason that personally I've got probably 6 of them, but I don't tend to use them myself. But that's not to say you shouldn't. If you're making your living from 360 imagery, you probably won't use a single camera and a tripod, because you get so much more flexibility out of it. There are a few other things that many of us as surveyors will remember or know, like the iStar. And I've mentioned that largely because lots of people have them, because they use them for colorizing point clouds and things. They've sort of gone into the mobile camera market, and as far as I'm aware, that they're no longer supported. I may be wrong about that, but I have a few people saying they just can't get support for it. The good news is you don't need that. You can easily replace them with something off the shelf and get probably a better, dare I say it, solution. You can certainly use HDR and processing to get it out. And then you've got Mosaic as well, as I mentioned, which is for mobile mapping thing. Okay, and then we move on to what I call the 360 LiDAR, or depth mapping. Now, a lot of people get upset if I say it's LiDAR, but it is a version of LiDAR. So that is really based around the old ubiquitous Matterport system, where they have a 360 camera system, but they're building LiDAR into it, combining LiDAR with those. What they are useful for, right. Great for doing real estate, great for showing things where the geometrical data doesn't need to see what's the word? Doesn't need to be wholly accurate. Trying to integrate point clouds that are derived from any of these into controlled survey grade point cloud, or even GeoSLAM, can be a bit of a nightmare. They're great for visualization and great for selling real estate and that sort of thing. But if you're looking at those, and to be fair, none of them are very good at coping with big dynamic range. None of them do HDR, and none of them are part. I think Matterport, I've left that blank because I'm not 100% sure, but I don't think anybody outputs in RAW. And the issue with these is they're great, but all of them require you to upload your images to another server. Okay, and that comes with its own issues, as you will see. Right, the next bit is sorry, Chris, thanks you for that. Titan is approx 15K. Yeah, you're probably right, but yeah, it's a monster, but it's not something I would use if I wanted to use photogrammetry, because as you'll see, you've got to have a common nodal point to use them for photogrammetry. Smartphones, on the other hand, they're in your pocket. You can use them for all sorts of things. And I think more and more people are going to use smartphones. The great application for these, well, smartphone by itself, you can just rotate things around and it will work. But the easiest way is to use a bracket. Like this is the Realsea G1, great, beautifully engineered. Or you can get for like 80 quid a Matterport Axis. And then your Matterport will take your images and process them in the cloud, and they own them, in essence. But what you can do with smartphones, now there's a whole series of apps which will turn your smartphone into an equivalent of a DSLR. They will be able to output RAW or /DNG, which is Apple and Adobe's format. They're able to do HDR bracketing so you can cope with the sunlight. You've got 360 apps, and I'm not going to list them because there's like 50 alone I found just on the App Store. I didn't even look at Android. But then you get other things as well. So you've got companies like Polycam who will allow you to use multiple ways of capture. So it will combine in one app photogrammetry and 360 and short range LiDAR to 10 meters and Gaussian splats. And the interesting thing about the 360 is they just rotate it. I'm just going to put me in here, because you might need to see. There you go. You might see my finger might help. So with Polycam, and they're doing really well. They've just announced they just got another £18 million worth of funding. I wish someone would listen to me, because I've got lots of ideas. But you've got these things built into a phone now. So although I might be talking about a single lens camera, you can do an awful lot of work with just your mobile phone. And this is the point, really, is 360 imagery has so many applications in terms of site documentation. You can get good enough documentation with your phone. Absolutely. In fact, I'd go so far to say is I could do most of my photogrammetry work with my iPhone 14. And I wouldn't be disappointed. And a lot of people who don't know would not be able to tell the difference. I would, but a lot of my clients would not. Right, so you've got as well, so smartphone camera apps, there's a whole series of ones, but some that I particularly like. VTS, something to look at. You can screen grab or take these and go searching for yourself. Polycam's great. There's another one, Recon. Oh no, that's a LiDAR. Insta360, of course, you take there and they will process it for you. Ricoh, Samsung, Matterport, all sorts. And there's over 50 others for you to choose from. It just depends on what you feel you're comfortable using. And let's jump onto laser scanner panos. I've been scanning for 20 years, I guess, something like that. And whenever I've delivered to an architect, is they love the point cloud, but then they never look at it. What they tend to look at is the panos. But the problem with the panos inside a laser scanner is the internal cameras, they're built around a LiDAR, not the camera. In my opinion, it should be the other way around, but I'm an image guy. So the internals, they lack dynamic range and exposure control. Normally they're using automatic setups, which you can't control or override. They tend to use ISO as the main tool of adjustment, which, okay, works, but it creates all sorts of noise at all the tonal ranges, not just in the shadows. And when I say noise, you probably know what I mean. In the shadows, you see lots of random purple and magenta specks. That's what we call noise. And we've got to get rid of that, especially when it comes to stitching, because it's random. And if I'm trying to get two overlapped images, it's not going to see in those shadows anything that makes sense. And you get these things, and a few people have hijacked the term HDR imagery. Is one manufacturer who says they use HDR imagery. HDR imagery requires you to keep the same f-stop and different shutter speeds, not just change ISO. That's their definition of HDR. It's not ours. It gives an HDR effect, but it's not really HDR. To do proper HDR, you've got to have control of the shutter speed and do bracketing. Okay, now drones. I know very little about drones. If anybody wants to help me out here, that's great. Nodal, Stefan, definitely. Nodal points. Yeah, we're going to come on to nodal points, guys, because that's the critical part of what we're talking about. Drones, yeah, 360 imagery is a real bit. I know nothing about them. I know you can spin them around and you can get 360s, but we'll skip that bit. If anybody wants to send me any information to help me out here, fine. Okay. And then we come on to the really specific things, the dedicated cameras, which will just capture everything. Sphere, one of the people who started it, they can cope with 26 f-stops. They can output in 32-bit format, which is pretty critical for what we want to do, with an image size to 100 megapixels. Lizard Q and the Zeiss Civetta, they're both based on Canon cameras. Lizard Q has slightly better performance, and the Klaus systems, I would recommend you take a pick at those really smart pieces of kit if you are making your living from stuff. These cameras are really designed for one big application, and it's crime scene documentation, where you've got work lights, dark lights, you're trying to document a crime scene and record everything at night. And that's really, and they are one stop. You press a button and it just spins around. And the idea is for a CSO or an investigator just to be able to put it in there, press a button, and then forget about it. You don't need to have a photographer's skill set to do this. All of them, as Alan and Stefan have mentioned, these all work on a nodal point. So everything, so the optical axis is on the same axis of rotation, the nodal point, or the non-parallax point, or there's another technical name for it, which is the correct name, but everybody knows it as a nodal point. And that's what we will do with our single axis cameras. Okay, and then we've got a whole series of brackets that we can use as well to put our single axis brackets on. I won't go through these, but most of them you can get from Amazon overnight. Some of the world leaders and the ones that people use, Nodal, Ninja, they're really robust, but the Bushman ones, they're all copies of something that looks a bit like this. Okay. All right, you get these and they cost around about just over £100. They're great. They just index around on a notch, and you put the camera on the correct nodal position, which takes you about 20 minutes to figure out. It's not hard. These ones on this side here, Gigaspan Round Shot, they are motorized version, and Nodal Ninja do a mechanical version as well. These are really great because you can program it to take whatever overlaps you like, and we'll talk about the number of overlaps you need to take in a minute. But you can program them. They're great. The issue with some of them is that they are designed for single image and photographers. They're not really designed for being used 24/7 in a rainy day on a night shift. I tend to use mechanical ones most of the time because they're quick. I don't have to worry about batteries. And if someone walks up and asks me if that camera is a speed camera or whatever they want, I can stop, or a bus comes in the way. You can pause all the other ones, but I found carrying light, the mechanical one's fine. Having said that, I do have a number of installations where we're doing crack measurement using 360 for inspection, and we've got motorized versions. And to me, Klaus, I'll have a look at there because their systems are really smart and ruggedized. They're not cheap compared to a £120 bracket, but if you need it for a particular job, a permanent mounting, or it's in you're doing it 24/7, that's a sort of piece of bracketry you might want to look at. Right, so what I use myself is a single lens camera. I use Sony, but there's nothing to say you can't use a Fuji one or a Canon or Nikon, whichever is your favorite. Which, you know, if you're going to buy one you might want to use for other photography too. But I use a Sony just because it's 61 megapixel, and also because it's got a very high dynamic range, so I can get away with an awful lot of stuff. Canon a little bit less, Nikon's around about the same, Fuji's around about the same. The best cameras at the moment, 15 f-stops, and that would be a Capture One, but that's a Phase One, but that's 52 grand. Yeah, I'd love one. If anybody wants to send me one to play with, that'd be great. Right, I'm in the way. Yeah, sorry, Alan. I'll get out of the way again. Sorry. It's full screen. Right, fine. Right, so what you're looking at is a combination of a lens combined with the sensor camera. And the lens quality is the most important part of it. What we want to do is, and for all 360 imagery, is minimize what we call chromatic aberration and any effects that go around the edge. So I would tend to focus, excuse the pun, on looking at the lens quality. Any camera that can take bracket imagery, which is pretty well most of them, and when I say it's the thing called AEB in Sony, automatic exposure bracketing, or called something else. You set a hero image and then the camera will automatically take 3, 5 or 7 shots, 3 each way, and then you process them. So you have to have one that'll take bracketed imagery, but to be fair, even the low price £600 ones will do that. You also want to go for the highest dynamic range you can afford, but also the best lens you can get, because it's the lens that defines it. The sensor's hardly an issue because, to be fair, there's 3 manufacturers of sensor that I know of, and they're all roughly the same. Sony are a little bit more because they've got slightly more pixels, but it's not about the size of the pixel. It's about, sorry, the number of pixels. It's more about the size of the pixel. When we're doing brackets, we need a minimum. If you can put a fisheye lens on them, then you'll get over 180 degrees. So in theory, you can use 2 images. I've never found that works. You need a minimum of 3 because the overlap's not quite enough. But then you can go around and you can take as many as you want. And there are some considerations there. For the high definition ones I do 3 rounds of 6 exposures. But I have got some where I've done 12 rounds of 20 exposures for where I'm measuring micro cracks with a medium format camera. So you can go to that. It doesn't really make any difference. You will see what we call giga pano images that you might see on the internet, where they stitch hundreds of images together of a mountain range or a cityscape. Essentially, it's the same thing, but we're talking about spherical 360s, not pano images, because there's nothing to stop you actually stitching all of them together. Okay. Whenever you're doing that, there's a trade-off. Now, for me, I use either an 8mm lens and do 3, or I use a 14mm lens and I do 18 images. And either way, I get the best results. But I choose and depend on what I want to do it. The main thing to think about is this trade-off you get between distortion and sharpness. GSDs, how big an area pixel represents on the surface. If I'm just doing things down a corridor, I don't need to, I'm only going to be looking at 3 or 4 meters at the most. I don't need to have 16 images because I'm going to get, a reasonably good GSD from there. But also something I've sort of skipped over is the fact that most of these cameras will capture video or static images. There are lots of others, but that's more to do with training, more the training packages and a bit more. I'm just giving you an introduction, as you'll see. Right, where do I want to go next? Right, here's a picture of the Klaus one. It's a lovely piece of kit. Go and play with it and look for them. Klaus Pix Explorer if you want to see like the top end of what you might want to be aiming for. But for 95% of you, it's probably not going to be something you need. Single lens. Okay, I'm not going to run through this. You all know that there's different sizes. All I wanted to point out on here is, so you can go for a cheap lens. Fine, it's got interchangeable. A micro four thirds lens is got a camera's going to cost you anything from 200 to 2.5 grand. An APS-C, sort of like Fuji's, brilliant cameras, 400 to 3 grand. Full frames, 1500 to top range 7. Sounds a lot, but hey, you just pay 50 odd grand for your scanner. Medium format, you're probably not going to need that unless you're like me and this is your sole business and this is what your function of photograph. I use it on heritage documentation projects where I want to get the best definition I can, but they range from 80 to 60 grand. The basic medium format phase 1 cameras starts at 50,000, 52 grand. Although you can get Fuji medium formats, which are a lot less, and they will do, to be honest, a pretty good job. We're talking about a bit nitpicking here, and you have to be a bit geeky and a bit to worry too much about it, especially when you're taking hundreds of photographs. You'll be looking at that if you are taking, you know, arty commission photographs to win National Geographic awards and stuff. The key issue really is it's the number of pixels is not necessarily defining how good quality it is. And having more pixels, like in a Sony 4R, which is what I use, allows me to stand further away back and take less photographs of an object, or less than having to get close up. People don't realize that that's one of the main benefits, especially when you come to photogrammetry. And image quality is more about the number of, it's not the number of pixels, but the size of the pixel. That gives you more control and dynamic range. Running through this, a few words about tripods. You're going to need a tripod. Okay, there's loads of them. Quick tips. Get one with a leveling head, or get a bracket that has a built-in leveling head. It'll save you hours. I always go for one with carbon fiber, because you will be taking photographs for a long time, all day, once you get into it. Get one with insulation on the legs, because your hands, the fingers are going to drop off in weather like this. And I always pick one that's baggage compatible, so I can stick it in my carry-on luggage as well, because I like to take my camera and stuff with me and not check it. Now, there are loads and loads, excuse me, need a quick drink. There are loads and loads of tripods, Benbow, Gitzo. My particular favorite, and I'm saying this out loud because I'm hoping they're going to send me one for review. If I'm promoting it, or give me some free ones, sponsor me. UK company called Three Legged Thing. They make great tripods, beautiful. They go up to 2 meters in height, and you can dangle them at all sorts. You've also got the monopod option, and you generally need a tripod. You don't always need one, because a lot of people can do it just with the old way of doing it. It was dropping a string and a weight over a mark of a stone and just rotating around it. It will work, but you're not going to get photogrammetry quality out of it, but it'll do a 360. Right. Oh, that's something else. Get right. Key issue. Okay. How do we find these? Where are they? These photographs. We're doing lots of 360s. Right. So the best way to do this is there's 2 or 3 ways. Some cameras have built-in GPS. Some people have built-in GPS if it's tied to your phone. If you're tethered or taking photographs in your smartphone, then chances are you're going to get all your photos logged anyway. You can use simple things like what 3 words if you want to locate things. But the key is, if you're taking lots of photographs, you need to say where they are in space. Good news that we'll all be seeing, maybe bad news to the survey community, is within the next year, we're probably going to get decimeter accuracy in our phones. That's the next phase, and decimeter accuracy to 100 millimeters for a 360 imagery, that's going to help. But also bear in mind is when we use this for photogrammetry, we get the camera pose calculated for us. So we get the X, Y, and Z coordinates of whatever coordinate system we're doing photogrammetry or reality capture in. But we don't necessarily get the bearing. We get the X, Y, Z, but not necessarily the bearing. There is one instrument that gives you all that, but if you've got £80,000 to spend, come and talk to me. I'll show you exactly what you should be buying. Right. The other thing you're going to need is some editing software. Now, because I do this every single day, there's lots of tools, and I have to sort people's problems out, but there's lots of tools of software that we should be using. I go into this more in my training courses, and my training courses is 10% photography, on-site cameras, because to be honest, I can teach anybody to do the HDR stuff in a couple of hours. But getting the images and getting the best quality images can be a little not tricky, but you need to know what you're doing. And then you get into big issues to do with organizing all your images. So these are quickly what I do. So DxO Pure Raw is the best raw converting tool out there, even though Lightroom and Capture One and other ones do it. I use Capture One as my main tool, not just because it's an editing tool, but I use it for managing all my images, and the database is brilliant for managing all my images rather than using Internet Explorer or some other or Finder to manage them in file folders. And why I use that, you'd have to go to the training course and I'll show you. But then you've got other things like Topaz Photo AI, which allows us to enhance, sharpen, denoise things. It's great. Problem with all of those, it just adds massively to the file sizes. So then you have to go through a process of flattening them again. But they're great. At some point you need it, Adobe Lightroom. Lightroom is now an internet-based thing. Lightroom Classic. It's great for processing. PTGui is my go-to stitching software. Like for many people, there's other ones around. HDR, Photoshop, great for getting rid of things, editing, generative fill. If I want to get rid of a taxi or a bike or whatever, or my big orange friend who's stood in front of the camera and is projecting stuff. Photomatix Pro, great bulk processing for HDR. Helicon Focus is for doing stacked focus work, where I'm got to get lots of things in focus that are in the foreground and the background. Rhino 8's my CAD package, where I use it for controlling all sorts of things. Script debugger, in Capture One, I can write command line scripts to bulk process things. So that's what I use. And then there's another one, Raw Therapy, which is free and it's brilliant for doing raw editing. It's great. It's got lots of tools, open source and free. The issue for me is it doesn't have a good enough database for me to use it for managing my images. But hey, it's pretty good. Right. So quickly, photogrammetry. I've got about 10 minutes left. Right. People say to me, can you use 360 for photogrammetry? And yes, you definitely can, but with a few caveats. First off, anytime, so photogrammetry from 360, what the photogrammetry softwares do is they extract a rectilinear or a cube, 6 faces from that, and then they use that as the image, just as if you were taking it with a camera or a drone. Again, the issue with that is it only works if you're on a common nodal point. Okay, if you've got a camera and the bracket and the cameras are set apart in any way, shape, or form, you will get what's called a parallax effect. So in other words, if you move it slightly, the image changes position. So you can use it, providing you are using a nodal-based system on a nodal bracket. So that gets rid of some of the things. You can still use it on, say, cameras like a Ricoh Theta or Insta, where you've got 2 images and they're joined more or less back to back, because although there's a little bit of error, you can get away with it, but you will see stitching errors with objects that are quite close. Right, so the other thing that you have to do, so you've got to use some rectilinear projection, and a 2-lens system works. You have to process the image to get consistent lighting. If you go past a bright work light or a window, if you're going down a corridor, it will break the stitching. It just will. And it relies on structure from motion type approach. Although some people think it has something to do with IMUs and things. It's not. It doesn't work like that, because you won't get an IMU accurate enough in a little camera. Otherwise, likes of Regal and everyone be out of business. So Planix, they wouldn't. A Planix IMU system on a drone is the most expensive part, or certainly is one significant part of a mobile mapping system. And the cameras, although they have tilt sensors in there just to get the spherical level so that it looks great, but it has no impact on. You can't measure distance between one image and another with these cameras. It uses structure from motion, and it uses the timestamps basically to say, look at these photographs and close to me. Don't look at the ones at the beginning and the end, because that's not where I'm going to see the tie-in points. But it uses exactly the same tie-in points, so it does work. What this means is that it's only really practical, I would say, for indoor work. The problem you've got with outside is the wind blows and trees move and all sorts of things happen. And you've got to use HDR processing for that. but that's not so bad thing. It's really quick with the tools I can show you. A couple of key things: mask the tripod and the person carrying it, because otherwise you're going to see the same thing in the same thing. So it sees the same tie points and it just goes, I don't know what's happening. So that's one of the reasons why people think 360 doesn't work. They've not used rectilinear projections. They've not got done the lighting out, and they've not masked the person, and what we call, or remove the nadir image is another way of doing it. Get rid of, in a cube, get rid of the bottom image and just take things. The critical thing for this is I'm doing 360 tour, then I might be 4, 5, 6, 8 meters separate. But the problem that you've got with photogrammetry, like in any photogrammetry, it's all about the overlap. So you've got to treat it just as if it was single images. What you do get is 6 images at one go, right? Now, of course, you can use the video, 360 video, and use frame extraction, and then play about with the frame extraction rates. Great tip. There's a free tool in Blender will allow you to do that. But the thing that I find is you can use it, but you'll often find you're going to have to fill it with single images, or combine it with a drone image, or to combine it with LiDAR. It's rare that you're going to be able to do it all. If you're doing a railway tunnel, it'll work. If you're doing a corridor, it'll work. If you're trying to do a corridor to a big room and a big hall, it's going to be tricky to do. You're going to lose it. Having said that, there's some amazing software. So 3D Flow Zephyr, they use a decompose tool, so you can use 360. Agisoft Metashape, I've been using it for, they've been doing it for ages. And another software called Mastico, which is used by mostly used by the effects and cinema industry to extract stuff. Or you can do things like process in the cloud. So you've got new software, well, not new, QPix has been going for 3 or 4 years now, where you take your photographs and you upload, and they do all that grunting for you. Having said that, it does fail sometimes if you don't, where you've got areas of big dynamic range. And the question I always say is, well, why do you really need a point cloud or a mesh? Do you need one? If I'm trying to show detail and stuff, do I need to go to all that process? Because actually, every time I produce a point cloud or a mesh, I'm going to get a destruction of detail. It's going to be far less quality than the photo. So this is where I think 360 imagery is going to come, is getting to its own. It's complementary to reality capture, but sometimes you want to go through all that process of all the registration and the processing, or then meshing it, when simple 360 image is, I can show it. Let me share a screen. I can show it. Yeah, we'll do it at the end. So I just want to skip through these bits. Okay, because we're running out of time. You're going to need some stitching software. The main thing about it is there's 2 sorts. One where you maintain the copyright because you're processing in-house yourself all the time. Okay, and those are those listed. So AutoPano, Giga, and PTGUI are probably the best one, but Huggin, PanoVR, KRPano, all the 360 tour imagery software, you can have stitching. Lightroom, Photoshop, Capture One are great for stitching single images, but not for 360. And then you go into the cloud-based solutions where you may not own the copyright to the images. Okay, so for something like Matterport or any of those other suppliers, there's a number of Chinese suppliers as well now. You've got to think carefully about what it is that you want to do with these. Do you want to maintain these? And especially if you're reselling them to your clients, you don't necessarily own those, and it's something to check out. Personally, I prefer to stitch and own everything myself, but there may be economic drivers, or your client may have a different way of thinking about it. Right. I'm going to be doing another LinkedIn live session about hosting platforms for viewing and sharing 360. It's such a massive subject. I've just listed some of the people here that you might want to chase up and track down on LinkedIn. The big players at the moment are people like QPix. They've gone from nothing to mega world domination very quickly. Beautiful company in Germany, Framents. iSight is a British company. OpenSpace will find your local sheriff. They're all over the place. There's a great new system that combines iPhone and this, made by VTS and John Schwalibog over in Michigan, I think. Andrew Badley's system of TerraVisas. And then one of the more interesting ones is, I think, if there's a company from Philadelphia, Nodiology, and what they are doing is they've got a simple plugin to take 360s to go directly into Esri. Suddenly you're opening up the ability to, and the applications they've got are to do 360 capture when you are after a disaster and things. But you can also build your own by DIY using your own 360 tours. It takes a morning to learn how to do that. Findability, yeah, probably for the next one, but that's a key bit. But let's skip on. If you're using software as a service, I wrote an article about that, which are 10 vital questions you may want to know if you're uploading your images and they're being hosted somewhere else. I would drag that out and have a look. FAQs. Right, I'll run through these pretty quick because we're running out of time. I think I've covered some of them. I guess probably look and review this later on. Can you use a gimbal for 360s? You can. The issue really is the optical center and the mechanical center of gravity of a camera and lens is not the same thing. So you may, if you're using like a Ninja gimbal for photographing or videoing or whatever, or you've got pano tools in the Ninja, sorry, in the DJI, you have a little tool on your phone. You can do a pano spherical image, whatever thing you want, but it's not a nodal image. That's the point. And can you get dimensions from 360 imagery? Yes, you can, for sure. The issue is sometimes they'll take a photograph at the bottom of a tripod and then raise the tripod up, and then they use a stereo pair. Now that's great for measurements just in front of the camera, but rubbish if it's vertical. It's all about the geometry. But what you can do is you can project these 360 imageries onto a low density point cloud. I could talk for hours about this. I'm going to finish there, guys. I'd like to thank a few people who've given me Survey Works, Inspire Structures. They've given me images and stuff like that. As we come up to the end of our hour, if you want to learn more about this, and I've gone through in an hour very quickly, just touching on this subject. One of the things I do is this training course. The next training course we've got is on the 27th, 28th. It costs around about 300 quid, 295. This is what I make my living from. So if you want to learn a lot more about it, maybe sign up to those. But if you don't and you want to find stuff, if you want a copy of this, just send an email to Barry at the Rich Pixel and just put link document, put workshop in the subject line, and I'll send you a copy of this. I'll be putting this video online as well, so you can view it at your leisure, and I'll be putting it on YouTube. Gosh, hour goes back so quickly. Right, that'll do for now. It's hold on a sec. Let's get back to me. All right, I've taken up enough of your time. Hopefully it's given you a bit of information. If you've got any questions, please just feel free to give me a call or drop me a line. I'm more than happy to help and pass on what I know. We've got this training course if you're interested. If you're not, still send me an email. Lovely to talk to you and share what I know. With that, I'll leave you. I've got my glass of wine here. It's wine time. It's Friday. So good luck and look out for the next one. We'll be doing something on hosting platforms and showing you examples of what you can do with the 360 images when you've got them. But good luck. Anything to do with 360s, give me a bell. Love to hear from you. Okay, guys, you take care, and I'll shut this up and you'll be able to see it. No worries, guys. Be good. Play nice. Okay, thanks, guys. Bye. Oh, and cheers. Good luck to whichever rugby team you're supporting this weekend, by the way.